It is for startup and fundraising, a most apt and relevant topic for the city of happening, city of Bangalore, the startup city of the India. So to enlighten us, to impart knowledge on this session, CA Rahul Saria is with us. On behalf of Bangalore branch and on behalf of all the participants, hearty welcome to CA Rahul Saria. Hearty welcome, Rahul.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
You are welcome. Friends, you are the reason for this all Wednesday study circle. Today, in fact, you are going to get the 2 hours of structured CPE also. So, hearty welcome to each one of you. This fantastic session, startup and fundraising. I'll take a minute of yours to inform the tomorrow's, the CA Days program. Friends, tomorrow morning 9:30, your branch is hoisting flag. CA flag is hoisted by your branch tomorrow 9:30 a.m. Chief guest for that program is our past president, CAR Balakrishnan. So I request all the members to join us virtually in Bangalore ICI YouTube. So since the COVID is still not under control, so we are not inviting members to the branch, only branch staff and MC members along with the chief guest. We are hoisting the flag. I request all the members to join virtually in our Bangalore ICI YouTube. After that, in the evening, we have very interesting 2 technical sessions. I mean, not technical, it is very interesting 2 session in the evening. So the first one is starting from 4 p.m. 4 p.m. is panel discussion. Eminent panelists are CA Mohandas Pai, CA Nilesh Vikamse, CA Padmini Srinivasan, CA Dayanima Sharma. The panel discussion moderated by CA Gurraj Acharya. It is from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. tomorrow. I request all the members to register that program. So then after 6 p.m., 6 to 7 p.m., 1 hour session from renowned orator, Dr. Gurraj Karajagi. He is going to talk on the topic how to handle our children in this pandemic situation, how to shape our children's mind in this pandemic situation. Very interesting topic, relevant to all young parents. I request all the members to register for that program. Very interesting on CA Day from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. It is a webinar. I request to register. It is a free program. Request everyone to register that program. That note, and from 2nd July to 7th July, 6 days virtual program on refresher course for system audit. Those who already completed DISA or CISA, so it's a refresher course for them. So once they attend this, it is a very detailed hands-on training kind of a thing. Experienced faculties are going to train you to help you to take up systems audit. Information systems audit you can take up once you attend this 6 days refresher course on systems audit. I request all the members to register. Very interesting. The opportunities are huge. So many agencies like RBI, SEBI and all made it mandatory. All the organization coming under them need to comply this audit requirement every year. So many inquiries also coming to the branch regarding this systems audit. So I request all the members equip yourselves to handle this systems audit. Other traditional audits are going down. GST audit may not be there this year. I request members to equip yourselves to handle systems audit. It is growing. Digitization is growing, means systems audits are going. So I request, in the growing field, we have to capture, otherwise non-CAs are going to take this opportunity, friends. CAs are meant for audit. We are expert in audit. By this skill development, we can do a good job as an auditor, as a systems auditor. I request all the members to register. There is a 6 days training program, hands-on training from the experts. It is under the aegis of digital Audit Accounting and Assurance Board of ICAI is conducting, hosted by Bangalore branch. I request all the members, those who already qualified under DISA, to register and learn from this virtual refresher course. That note, once again, hearty welcome to you. Over to Divya to introduce our speaker. Over to Divya.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sir. Very good evening, members. I take this opportunity to introduce our speaker of today's program. We have CA Rahul Charia with us. By qualification as a fellow member of ICAI, Company Secretary, Diploma in Information System Audit, Postgraduate Diploma in Business Administration, Certificate on IFRS Valuation Blockchain Technology, Certification on M&A from IM Bangalore. He has also done certification course on Financial Modeling and Valuation from EY. He's co-founder at Nimble Growth Organics. He had his consulting firm in finance and legal domain. He has served as head of finance, CFO for various global and Indian startups. With this very brief introduction, we welcome you for today's program, sir. Hearty welcome once again on behalf of Bangalore branch.
Over to Rahul. Please take it forward.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. B.T. Sethi for inviting me to actually share my knowledge, whatever limited knowledge that I have in the startup domain. And second, thank you, Divya, for a quick and a short, nice introduction. With this, without making you wait long, I'll just start. Just let me start with sharing my presentation. So I hope my screen is visible to everyone. Can someone confirm?
Yes, now correct.
Visible, sir.
Visible.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Okay, so my dear friends, I understand that obviously we all chartered accountants have geared up here and to discuss about startups, the benefits of startups, fundraising, and what are the professional. As Mr. Sethi just now mentioned, that we need to start thinking on new avenues of increasing our professional revenue as well as professional domain, right? So I think my major focus would be on that area today, we will discuss a lot about what are the new areas of opportunities under startups that we can actually play a role, right? And we actually have a large course, particularly sitting in Bangalore. So I've taken these kind of sessions in various different parts of the country, which they always say that you come from Bangalore, so you say that you have so much opportunity, but we don't have in those cities. But I think today we are lucky that we are doing this session in Bangalore itself, where we know that it's a hub for startups. Like in India, at least it's the #1 place where you have maximum of startups that get registered. But simultaneously, let me warn you two things, right? One, you'll have to wear two hats today. One, you'll have to leave your CA hat in some portions, and you have to wear a new hat, which I'll give you today. Like you'll have to think like a businessman, think like a entrepreneur, think like someone who is running their own business, right? Now, gone are the days where we were limiting ourselves to only tax filing or auditing or those kind of compliance kind of work, right? And I don't say that that's not important, that's equally important. But slowly, we all know the kind of automation that's happening around in each and every field that we operate in. Obviously, the cream that we could enjoy in terms of auditing, that would go away, right? Now, even our clients, so to say, would require for new innovations from our side. Secondly, why I say that you'll have to leave your CA hat in a lot of areas when we discuss today, because we are bound to, and we are tuned that way, right? Since last 50 years or so, since the time we have been learning, we are readers of law. And I understand that for every comma and full stop is very, very important. That is indeed. But at times we'll have to leave those things behind and just think from more of a pragmatic point of view. I'll definitely run you through what I mean by this. So to start with, before even if I start my session, just a quick brief about me. So whom are you hearing, right? So of course, Divya has mentioned partly, but I would like to mention that before this, so right now I run my startup as a co-founder called Nimble Growth Organics. We're into organic farming. In Bangalore itself, we have farms across Karnataka. But simply before this, I have been CFO for a couple of startups, well-known startups, to name a few like Vedantu, Rentomojo, etc. Before that, I had my own consulting in the area of startup. Before that, I had my own practice. Again, when I say practice, it's a traditional practice, that is auditing, taxation, etc. So I am coming from experience from a practitioner to a professional consultant to startups to a CFO in the sitting on the other side of the table and finally becoming a co-founder of a startup. So I think that culmination has given me good exposure. I wouldn't say that, of course, there's a lot to learn still, but that has given me a good exposure where actually I can share a knowledge. I can tell you which are the areas. So let's start without waiting. If you have any questions, I would request the moderator, Divya, to, if you want, you can feel free to stop me in between, or maybe you can note down the question. We can have a Q&A session at the end. I'm okay with any kind of model, right? Just feel free to stop me in between. In fact, I'll get a breather in between because I speak very fast and I speak continuously. That's my nature. Okay, so let's begin with. So first of all, if whenever I ask a group of chartered accountants, right, especially the professional like us, that what do you mean by startup? The first thing that we start looking for, is there a definition, a particular law which defines a startup, right? We'll have to leave that today. Forget about whether there is a law which defines what is a startup, whether is there a body which is defining what is a startup. I'm not asking from a legal point of view. I'm just asking today, if someone is asking you, do you run a startup? What should be my answer? Suppose, say for example, I have opened up a small pan shop or maybe a small grocery shop, right? Would you call it a startup? In my personal view, now of course people may debate on this, but in my personal view, even if you start a smallest of a business, that is a startup. So which is in our traditions, right? Any entrepreneur who is starting a business which is with his own money, that is definitely a startup. But then there is always a question that why is it that his startup gets funding so easily? They're making super losses irrespective of what's the business fundamentals. So we all have learned about economics, right? Since our childhood, in our school time, college, or maybe even CA curriculum. The basics of business is like, there are 4 factors of production. 1, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. Today, if you speak to a student of class 11 and 12, if you tell them, hey, you want to run a business, go and learn first about the 4 factors of production, he will abuse you. Seriously, I'm telling you, he will abuse us that in which lifetime are you living today? That would be that student's question. Because today, if you see a startup, there's no land at all. The offices are all rented. That too, they can just leave that office and move out in a few days' time. So there's no land, no shed, nothing, no investment in land. Labor has been replaced by technology, big time. So to earlier times, if something could be done with 10,000 labors, the same thing can be actually be achieved by 10 people only with the use of technology. So land and labor is gone. Now what is left? Left is your entrepreneur and capital. Now entrepreneur is someone who is a promoter or a founder or a business person or a visionary who is starting to think as a vision, as a business. And second, capital, that is being provided by, traditionally it has been always been provided by the banks in form of mortgage loan. It could be a CC loan or whatever. We have been through all those financing through banking channels, which continues today. But yeah, but there's a new kind of capital that is coming, that people have started buying shares of your company, irrespective, even when you're not listed somewhere, right? That is kind of capital. So in those 4 factors of production, what is left out is land and labor is gone. Capital and entrepreneur is the main key factors, I would say, if you want to start a startup per se, right? Of course, now one may argue that no, if I have to set up a manufacturing plant, then still I need all those 4, right? Definitely you need all those 4, but not to at that extent. What was the time, say 2 decades back, or maybe 3 decades ago, right? So this is where I want to say anything is a startup, but it's important to understand what is a fundable startup, because that is real startup in real sense in the economy or in the ecosystem that we talk about to people, that what is a startup. So from that angle, it becomes very, very interesting, correct? So let me show you a quick flow chart or a graph or a diagram which I found in Google, which is very interesting. I'll give you 30 seconds to just go through the flow of this, then we'll discuss a bit. 30 seconds, yeah. Cool. So I'll not run you through the whole thing again, assuming that you've gone through, but I'll just highlight a couple of things, right? One, for an entrepreneur to start a startup, you have to live in the future ahead of your time, which basically means you have to be a visionary. You have to see beyond what others cannot, right? If you're able to see something which others cannot, if you're able to see a problem in the society which you want to solve, be it through technology or without technology, that's a different story. Then they say you have to first create a prototype. Now, what is a prototype? You can call it a sample. You create a prototype, a sample, we call it a POC, proof of concept, we call it a beta version in different terms, right? Now, these terminologies become very, very important. As professionals, when we deal with these guys, right, with the founders, with the promoters, we need to talk in their language. I can't tell to a founder and tell them, hey, since you have raised money from someone in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, you will end up paying taxes as income from others under section 56 to 7B. I can talk in that language. We can talk in that language, definitely. But you can't talk in. The guy would say, "What the hell are you talking about?" And as soon as you start using the term, "Hey, there is an angel tax liability under this," he would say, "Oh yeah, I know what is an angel tax." He would immediately catch. So we need to come down to that. Of course, angel tax is not a term which is defined under income tax law, but that's the practical term that we all use, right? And being in Bangalore, I'm sure sometime or the other we would have come across this term. Even if you have not, we can just go to Google and just see what is an angel tax. It basically talks about the other sources of income when you raise money at a higher valuation than what your book value says as per Rule 11 UA of income tax, right? So once being a visionary, you make a prototype, you show it to your couple of people, they like it, maybe they give you again feedback. You make sure that there's a product market fit. Again, it's another term. I'll use a lot of jargons, which will cover one slide also on that. But it's very, very important for you to understand the jargons so that you can start using it from day one itself to impress your potential clients or maybe existing clients as well, right? The tech clients specifically, the tech co-founder. Most of the co-founders, and it's a fact, even if they may not be all from IITs, but most of them are from a tech background, because that's a perception that, okay, if you're a coder, you can become a startup. And that's not true. But yeah, that's a fact in majority of the cases. Then once you have got enough number of customers who are using, then you may look for some other little bit of funding. We'll talk about funding in detail going forward, and then maybe build a better version and suddenly start getting more users. Then what it says, you go to 1,000 users. Now this is just a number. Don't get bogged down by that. You have to get exactly. Okay. Someone says that I should slow down a bit. Definitely, I'll try to do that. So the next step is towards getting those 1,000 users. Now, don't worry about that. You have to get exactly 1,000 users because this is just a number, right? Once you've got those 1,000 users, then you grow 5% week on week. And it's written hard but proven possible. There are companies who grow 5% week on week. And then it says keep growing, keep growing, keep growing. Finally, till you get a success, right? Now, this is where I want to bring your attention. Whatever number you start with, whatever the idea that you have, to become a fundable startup, you have to grow super fast. It has to be a highly scalable idea. Then you are a fundable startup in terms of a VC. Let me take an example. Zerodha. So whoever are actively into stock market trading, we know there are hundreds of brokers across the country. Known like maybe Kotak, ICICI Direct, etc. Religare, etc. Right? But suddenly Zerodha came up with a new plan, a unique idea where they said we'll discount all the brokerage, we'll not charge anything, just 20 rupees flat. That too only in FNO transactions. Your delivery is absolutely free, and they made a drastic change in the market. Even without funding, today they made what I'm told that they made a 1,000 crore EBITDA in FY21. That is the kind of growth they have. They have become a largest broker in our country today. That is something really interesting. And today investors are after them that please take our money, but they don't want their money. Correct. So that is also equally important. We need to understand when should we raise money, and this is where we can play a big role in terms of advising our client whether this is the right time to raise money or not. Should we or should we raise money, right? So in all, to answer my question that I started, right? What is a startup? For me, rather than asking what is a startup, the question should be what is the right fundable startup? One, the idea should be unique. Now, it need not be a new idea, right? It could be a copy paste idea. Absolutely fine with that. There's an idea which is already proven. In fact, it's easier to convince an investor that if it's a copy paste idea which has already been proven in a different market, could be, or it could be existing idea which you are improvising a bit so that it becomes more useful for the users, or at a cheaper cost, or the similar function at a cheaper cost, because your cost of production or maybe cost of service is lower than the competitor. That's an easily sellable idea. And if it has already been proven in some markets, say for example, there was an idea called Uber, the cabs, right, in the US or in the different parts of the world, including Singapore or China. Now the same model was copied and brought down in India and called Ola. And there were certain other companies which got consolidated, etc. Today we know Uber and Ola are kind of equal competitors. So that could be done. It was a copy paste idea, but that was a unique idea in India at least. And that was scalable, and they did scale. Of course, there was a lot of capital required, but they did that, right? I think Bhavesh Agarwal, yeah, Ola. So Mr. Bhavesh actually proved that yeah, he could do that, right? So this is something that is very, very critical. Now, once we have understood, right, that okay, what is a startup, and if there's a client who is coming to you that hey, I want to start a startup. Now the next question is, okay, how do you start that, right? Now this is something that you are going to kill me for. You'll say, yeah, why the hell are you even telling us this? We are champions of. We can do this even while sleeping. I know that, but quickly we'll just brush up through, right? What the point of view that I want to give. So when you are trying to advise a client on what is the right form of organization, there are multiple factors that needs to be looked into. It's not that. So I have heard people saying, hey, now can you help me just get a GST registration? I said, why do you need it? Does your business require it? Do you have enough time? No. Now Modi ji has come as a prime minister and he will be after. I want a GST registration. Then it takes time to make them understand, no, what is the law? Do you really need that registration or not? You need not worry just about that, okay, there would be stricter rules or there would be a lot of compliance requirements. So all that I'm trying to say is that whether you are creating a firm, whether it's a proprietorship concern or a partnership firm or a company, of course, there are different factors which are very, very important. First and foremost is the law, whether it's under company law, partnership law, or maybe different NPOs, etc., which we are all aware of. I do not. Second, again, very important is the taxation. So we all know today, taxing a company is cheaper compared to when you tax a proprietor or a partnership firm, so to say, right? Again, talking about a higher income. If someone is earning more than 5 CR, we know the tax rate goes as high as 44% as well. So it does not make sense at times. But of course, the compliance may be low. So those things we all are aware that way. But the most important thing right now, what I'm trying to say is that from a founder's perspective is that to understand his business first and then jump into a conclusion, what is the best form of organization? Does it make sense to start with a partnership firm today? And as the business grows, if there's a equity interest, if there's interest of investor, then convert that partnership firm into a company, or so to say, maybe it could be LLP to company, or it could be possible that there's a single man army, but you know that is a very scalable model there, but he wants to showcase to the world that it's a large organization. Now you can form a company, maybe it could be a OPC as well. But if you form a private limited company, I can have. So I've done that, right, in the past for myself. So that's, I can share that example. Is that I had 3 different visiting cards with my name. One was kind of a director, one was kind of founder, one was kind of sales head. So depending on whom I'm interacting with, I could show that particular visiting card to that guy. I think that there is a scope for negotiation where I can come back or send someone else to negotiate better. In that case, I could say I am just a sales head. I can't take this call. I can't close this deal, right? And the other way around, where I had to show that, yeah, I am the decision maker. I've shown that director card or the founder card as well. So there are things that we need to think of. Again, talking about those other things, like you need to have a website, you need to have your trademark of your company's name, etc., etc. So those things are equally important, which we all are aware of. So I'm not delving much deeper into it. So once the organization is formed, depending on the business requirement, the next comes list of compliances. Now there are people who ask me, as a startup, what are the compliances that I need to follow? So very simple answer to that: whatever we do for any other private limited company, the same is the compliance for any startup. Startup is just a buzzword again. It's just a private limited company for us from the legal point of view. So whatever compliance there's a host of compliances: PAN, TAN, trade license, SOX establishment, PTAX, current bank account opening, etc., etc. And I think government has done a good job on that part. A lot of things come just into the time of incorporation itself. So I think we should definitely do it. But obviously the compliance does not stop there, right? Then there are registrations under PF, ESI, GST, import-export code. Now people don't know whether IEC is required or not. Now this is one area that I would say generally every private company, they need not follow, right? Especially the FEMA and RBI regulations. So like for example, any company which is raising money from outside India, overseas, right? Any non-resident investors, you need to do a filing of a form called FCGPR, that is foreign currency GPR filing, right? That talks about basically the FDI that you raise in the company, that has to be reported to RBI within a specific timeline. And that is very, very critical. If you miss out on that, it's a long penalty and very difficult to actually rectify it with the RBI guys. So this is one area I think many of us may not have come across. but you need to know a bit. And again, it's not a tough thing, right? So basically, again, a form which needs to fill, but of course, with a lot of documents, ensuring that you have your FIRC or FIRA, generally FIRC, foreign inward remittance certificate from the bank. Second could be your KYC of the investor, which is very important. That has to come through the SWIFT code transaction between the banks, and it's a very Herculean or a very slow process if something goes wrong on that part. So that way it becomes very important. Then depending on a particular industry, there could be different licenses. Like for example, for us, like at Nimble Growth, we are into organic farming. So for us, organic certification is very, very important. There could be areas where we can advise on even that matter. For a medical company, it could be medical license. For a food company or a restaurant or a hotel, it could be FSSAI license, etc. Right? So these are the commercial laws that we talk about. I know it sounds boring right now because you all are aware of this, but yeah, we'll quickly jump into we'll switch gears to startup mode. Next, now when I asked you what is a startup, we obviously first thing that we look for is what is the definition of startup. I think yes, Indian government has tried to define a startup as per, but today to get funds from an investor, do I need to be a Startup India registered company as per the Indian government norms? No, not at all. They don't even care. Of course, if you're getting some benefits of it, you should definitely try for it. But this is one area where we can actually advise our clients. Even a lot of them are not even aware of, even if they are aware of, they don't know how to go about it. This is one. So I put up the website as well. So Startup India. So there are different types of registration under this Startup India program, right? Which is interesting and very helpful. And even from the taxation perspective, I'll come to that point by point. First, it's governed by a department called DPIIT. I think it's Department of Promotion of Industrial and something undertaking. DPIIT under registration, which is called a startup recognition. It has 3 conditions. One, you can get it registered up to 10 years of incorporation. Whenever you are incorporated, up to 10 years is possible. So as soon as you cross 10 years from your date of incorporation, you are no more a startup as per their definition. You could be a private limited company or a registered partnership or an LLP. So now here, if you are starting as a proprietor, you cannot get a Startup India registration. So this is something that you need to take care of, right? Second, your turnover of the company in any of the financial year in those 10 years should be less than 100 crores. The day you cross 100 crores, you are no more a startup, which is fine. Now, this Startup India registration is a 5-minute job. So filling that form is a 5-minute job. It's a very simple form. Of course, you need to fill some data points like how are you unique. Now, to be very frank, though it says that you should be unique, the idea should be great, but in my experience, I might have got more than 25 companies registered under DPIIT. Whatever you fill in next 2 days or maximum 1 or 2 days or 3 days, you get the registration number confirmed. So that's kind of a process. It's kind of they're accepting each and every one. You should be a company, I think. That is all what they require, and turnover should not be gross based on your financials. That is the major criteria. Others are not so important in my view. That's the practical experience that I'm talking about, right? You go to this website. There's a simple registration form, fill it up, and it's free of cost, no cost. Of course, you may charge your clients if they are willing to pay, but again, that's a personal call, right? Second, which is very important, which a lot of people are trying to get, is that there's a section called 80 IAC in the Income Tax Act, which talks about a tax holiday as a startup registration. For that, the preliminary criteria is you should be DPIIT registered. Only once you are registered under this in the website, then you get all these benefits, whatever we'll talk about now going on forward, right? But for 80 IAC, the criteria is you have to be a private limited company or an LLP. So if you see, though they are giving a DPIIT registration to a registered partnership, but you don't get 80 IAC benefit. Then there's a form called Form 1, which is again a very simple form. But this form will ask you, what is the innovation that you're bringing? How much employment are you going to create with this idea? Is this really innovative? Now, don't take this form lightly. I'm telling you, in my experience, what I have seen, that very, very less, I don't have the exact data, but if suppose, say, for example, 100 companies have applied for this, not even 2 or 3 companies have got the approval from the department, because they would ask you hundreds of questions like, how is it innovative? Now, how do you define innovation, right? There's no definition. As I mentioned, something which is already there in US, if I'm telling I'm bringing that idea to India, it's innovative for India, right? But you can always say, no, it's a copy paste from US. So, and plus again, the problem is that the people who ask these questions, I do not know whether they're competent enough to check whether something is innovative or not. This is the practical challenge that people, if someone can master this, knowing the people at that the other side of the table and understanding what is really innovation, what do they expect, then this could be a great tax audit. I think what they allow is 3 years of tax holiday in those 10 years of startup journey. So you get to choose any 3 years in which you get 100% tax exemption. But again, the point is, generally in a startup, it's a loss making in the initial years. And then you have carry forward of losses for 8 years. So depending on the kind of model, there could be some ideas, some areas where they could actually take benefit of this section. But wherever this is applicable, this is a big area of practice where you can actually make a lot of money with the client as well. Because getting them tax holiday for 3 years is no joke. And any which ways, I'm telling you that it's not easy, but it's a very great avenue to enter into and start working towards that, right? So the second one, which we spoke about briefly, that is 56 to 7B, it's called angel tax. Now, what is angel tax? If a company is raising money, now suppose I start a company, right, and I raise some angel money initially from some high net worth individuals, right? My company is obviously, if you see my book value of my company, would be almost zero, right? I have nothing. I just started a company with an idea. There is no assets, there is no revenue, nothing. But still, there are people who have started trusting me and they have ready to put money. So if I do a valuation of my company book value per share as per 11 UA or maybe whatever the methods that I follow, that suppose that comes to 10 rupees, that is a face value that I've issued the shares with, right? But obviously, when I'm raising money, I may raise at a very high valuation. So that difference, 56 to 7B is trying to tax, especially when you are raising that money from the Indian, because 56 to 7 is only applicable for resident companies. So basically, when you raise money from a resident investor, correct? So when that is not taxable, so non-resident does not come under angel tax anyways, but that exemption you get only if you are registered under Startup India. So you get a DPIIT registration done, and then you apply for this angel tax. It's called under Form 2. Now it's a very, very simple form with certain conditions. You need to fill a form, put a declaration, upload it. You get this in maximum 1 or 2 days. No question asked. They will just ask a declaration and they will issue it. Very, very easy. But you and me know it's easy. The startup founders may not know it's easy. You can always charge for applying for it, though it's an online program, unless someone discovers, yeah, it's so simple, right? But having said that, one thing that is very, very important, if there is an already existing CIT appeal going on, or there is an order that has come from the income tax department on this issue for the past matters, then that year would not be covered even after you get this approval from the DPIIT department, that is the income tax department, correct? But suppose a company was formed in 2016 and I apply for this certificate, angel tax exemption certificate, in 2019, and there have been no history of income tax notice on any particular assessment year, then I get this benefit of angel tax going back from date of incorporation itself. So that's a good beauty of this. I get the retrospective effect of this exemption certificate that I get from the day one itself. So the department cannot actually issue me a questionnaire or ask for an angel tax payment at any case. Of course, there are conditions that your capital raise, including premium, should not be more than 25 crores post the issue. That means you cannot raise more than 25 crores from the angels to get this exemption. Secondly, you cannot invest in any assets like land, buildings, securities, etc. Which, now this I would like to highlight here, securities. Securities means shares. It means mutual funds as well, right? So you need to be ensured, say for example, a company raises 10 crores, right? You may be using, as per plan, you may be using 1 or 2 crore or 3 crore, maybe for the next 3 months. But balance 6 to 7 crores, you would not keep it idle, right, in your bank account, in your current account. You would want to invest somewhere. So what generally companies do, they invest in debt mutual funds and of course bank FDs. But debt mutual funds are completely prohibited. So this you need to be very careful of. You cannot invest in mutual funds at all because those are securities at the end of the day. But of course, you can put your money in FD. So today you may say, any which ways your debt mutual fund or FD fetch me the almost similar return, so there's no difference. I'm okay with a bank FD. But that was not the case a year back, right? Before all this corona and then the interest rate fall, the repo rate fall, etc. came in, right? So today, of course, it does not make much sense to take that risk as well. But again, this was important to highlight. The Form 2 is a very simple form, as I mentioned. It's a 2-minute job. Take a declaration, upload, immediately file, and that's it. You're done with it. Okay, there are other benefits of Startup India registration. So just simply, so as I mentioned in my last slide, the first step is DPIIT registration. Once this is done, these are additional benefits that is an optional. Further, there are more benefits. Once you are DPIIT registered, you can actually take all these benefits from that particular website, right? One, any trademark that you apply, you get a 50% discount on the fees, government fees. If I'm not wrong, for a private limited company applying for trademark one trademark under one class, the charge is 9,000 rupees. But if you are a DPIIT registered, you just need to have that number. The lawyer can put that number in the trademark application itself, and you get a 50% discount immediately. So 4,500 becomes your fees. Patent application, you get up to 80% discount on fees based on various criteria. I have not applied practically, but what I understand, patent application fee is very less in case of in case government fee is very less. So that discount really does not help a lot us, but it does help some to some extent. But the lawyer fees for applying for a patent is anyways very expensive. But will the lawyer be ready to give you a discount? That is always questionable. So that we'll have to figure it out. Again, winding up of company can be done within 90 days. So says their website. I have not done that practically myself, so I can't comment on that. But yeah, under IBC 2016, this is what they said, that if you are Startup India registered, then you can close down your company in 90 days. You not wait for 2 years for a normal winding up process where you need to say there's no asset, no income for 1 year, and then you wait for 1 year again, then you apply. So those are gone away, which is a very useful thing. Labor laws, you get an option to self-certify up to 3 years for multiple labor laws. I think there are more than 9 labor laws in which they say you just need to self-certify that I am compliant, I am doing everything. That is good enough for them. And post that only, so for up to 3 years, there wouldn't be any inquiry, any questions or any notices from the department unless they have a information in writing, kind of similar to a provision called reason to believe under income tax. And I'm assuming with the new labor code that is coming in, probably that would again be incorporated under Startup India benefits. So these are the benefits that are there under Startup India, which I think is a huge scope, and which is a very easy one. In fact, not only scope, of course, it's there's a scope among startups, because to my knowledge, there are hundreds of startups that get registered every day in India. In Bangalore specifically. India, of course, yes, it's a larger number, but even in Bangalore, there's a multiple company, and suddenly there's a multiple company which is closing down. We just hear the good stories, the success stories, right? But if you see the other side, almost 98% of the startups close. Now, even if they close, they require professionals' help to closing down their company, because if they don't, that the same founder cannot become a director in another company if they fail in compliance in one particular company. We know the law, right? So there's a huge scope even on the compliance side of things. Though my focus today is not on the compliance side, it's more on the business side of things. So let's start with that now. So as I mentioned, right, startup, if we want to enter into the startup world, it's very important that we catch up certain jargons that is being used, and we start talking the language of the startup. So when let me share you a small anecdote. So when I was into startup consulting, so I've helped multiple startup founders to scale up, to set up their house in order, especially the finance team. I played a conduit between the senior management team and the finance team. I have helped them create MISs, etc. To do that, of course, I am not a techie, right? But I understand logics. We can build logics, but we cannot write and code. A lot of us can code as well, but I can't code. So I thought, but I need to learn something where I can actually go and talk in front of them in their language, right? One, of course, I learned all these jargons based on my experience, whatever I had. Apart from that, I enrolled for a course called Blockchain Technology by ICA. I think I love ICA programs because those are of real good quality. That was a 5-day program where I just learned about what is a blockchain technology. And to be very frank, since it's a new technology, most of the startup founders also, being from tech background, they didn't know what is what is blockchain technology at the level that I got to know, at least at a conceptual level. That helped me break the chain with them. So the breaking the ice, this blockchain technology played a big role there. They were excited. Oh my God, this chartered accountant who's coming to, he's talking about blockchain technology. He's not talking about all the tax laws, return filing, etc., etc. This is where the real game changer on communicating with them, coming to their level, talking in their terms makes all the difference. So some of the jargon that I would want to discuss here is that I think this would be known to all of us. Now, what is B2C and B2B? Generally, again, not in Bangalore, but outside Bangalore, generally, when I speak to chartered accountants, the first answer is, if you are GST registered, you are B2B. If not, you are B2C. No, we'll have to remove that hat right now of a chartered accountant and think like a business person. Think like a businessman. For a founder, for a company, I don't even care whether you are GST registered or not. For me, business is important. For an investor, business is important. So if I'm catering to consumers directly, I am a B2C customer, a B2C business. If I'm catering to corporates or maybe a supplier who would further supply to the consumers, I am into B2B, right? For example, For example, Zerodha again. Okay, Zerodha is a B2C company, correct? Because they are catering to the customers directly as a broker, and they are charging charging a fee as a broker from the customer. Now that's a B2C company. Now what could be a B2B? I am providing a broking service, say a rental property broking services, but only to corporates, right? Only that kind of corporate who would further go and take my service and further lend it to someone. Say, for example, I rent furniture to a company which further rents it to further consumer to different companies. Like, for example, Nimble Growth, we are a B2B company. What we do, we produce organic fruits and vegetables. We supply to all the B2B players out there. So you name any player, organic F&B player in Bangalore is all our customer. Further, they would supply to people like you, individuals who are ordering from Big Basket. Now, Big Basket is my customer. It could be Farmizan, it could be Gourmet Garden, etc. So these are B2B. So it's very important to understand when you are talking to a startup founder, B2C and B2B is purely from the business point of view. Because this is why I'm stressing so much on this, though it's a simple point, is because when we build a financial model for them, which will come to it slowly after some time, when we build a startup model for them, it's very, very important if we understand the business model first, even before getting into the business model, right? The next is cap table. I'll come to that a bit later. Very interesting term called cash burn. Now, as I mentioned, things are changing, right? I give you an example of 4 factors of production. We just changed the definition of factors of production are changing today. So land and labor is gone. Similarly, we all have grown. Now, it took a good time for me, right, to move from that traditional practitioner, CA practitioner or a finance student from a chartered accountant point of view to moving to the startup world, right, where people are losing money. They are burning in red continuously, but their valuations are growing crazily, right? Zomato is planning for an IPO, but it's a loss-making company. Flipkart was at a deep loss, but till it was sold for $19 billion. Now, I don't know how many zeros does it contain, right? So that's the kind of transaction that is happening. Today, if you go and see the US stock exchange or a NASDAQ or something, out of top 10 companies, 7 companies are tech companies without any land and labor. The only 3 would be a manufacturing companies. Like, for example, Apple, I would consider as partly tech and partly manufacturing, but otherwise Netflix, Microsoft, Dell. So all the top 10 companies, the most valued companies are tech companies. So what is cash burn in terms of startup? In our terms, it's simple net cash outflow in a month. So if I'm making $100 in a month as revenue, if I'm spending $150 in a month as an expenditure, that is cash outflow, not a P&L expenditure, not a accrual system, cash basis, then $50 is my net cash burn. Now, this is the term that is very common in the startup world. Investors also talk in that language, that what is your cash burn? What's your monthly, how much you're burning? What's your cash burn in a month? What's your runway? That will tell you your runway. Runway meaning if I have $1,000 in my bank, if I'm burning $100 per month, my runway is 10 months. Simple. In 10 months, I'll be cash out. So I will not be having any cash. If I don't raise money beyond that, then I'm gone. I'm doomed. So I need to close down. So that is called cash burn becomes very, very important. So we are burning cash, right? Cohort, I'll explain this cohort later on with an example. CAC. CAC is a very important term. Customer acquisition cost. Now, in traditional term, we used to call it marketing cost. But in your startup world, we call it CAC, customer acquisition, especially in the B2C model, right? So what is the customer acquisition cost? For every customer that I want to onboard into my company, into my platform for providing services or providing a product, whatever I incur, we all enjoy the cashbacks, referral bonus, etc. Right? That is basically part of my customer acquisition cost, which is very, very important. Second is a fully diluted cap table. So I had left out this cap table that time. I'll just cover that now. So if you see a ownership table, right? We call it cap table is also called capitalization table. So it is a combination of all the shares that have been issued by the company. Say, for example, I issue equity shares, I issue preference shares. Now there are 2 types of shares. I could issue a convertible debenture or a bond. Now these all combination of all these 3 ultimately telling you who are the real owners of the company is called a cap table, right? Now, what is the fully diluted cap table? If I have equity shareholders plus I have CCPS, that is compulsory convertible preference shares, which has been issued to someone. Now there could be a formula, right? Conversion formula. Say, for example, I say every preference share would be converted, every 2 preference shares would be converted into 1 equity share. In that case, I know 0.5 is the conversion factor, right? So if I have 100 equity shares, I have 100 CCPS. 100 CCPS would convert into equity as 50. That means Holder of equity shares are holding 100 shares of the company, whereas CCP are holding only 50 equivalent equity shares. So my overall percentage holding would be 66 and 33% each. That is equity holders and CCPS holders. That is called a fully diluted capital. So after conversion, what is my shareholding? That's called a fully diluted cap table, right? More example could be there are ESOPs that a company issues. So when they issue a ESOP, obviously that dilutes my shareholding, right? Though it has not been issued legally. If you check, go to MCA and check the cap table, obviously it would be different. But when you see a fully diluted cap table, that would tell you actually what is the real ownership of this company. So that becomes very, very important for us to understand who are the real owners of the company. And this is a part of a legal document as well. Next very important term is LTV. Now LTV is something called lifetime value of a customer. What's the lifetime value of customer? In very simple terms, suppose I am Facebook, okay? I'm not Mark Zuckerberg, but yeah, I would like to take that privilege of calling myself one. Would love to be one, right? So suppose I am Mark Zuckerberg and I have a company called Facebook which I've just started right now, right? And I want to onboard more and more customers. The idea is how much can I earn from every customer that comes on my platform, right? So that is called LTV. So lifetime value of a customer. That means if I say that generally when a customer comes on my platform, becomes my customer, suppose I am using Ola, I am Ola. There's a customer who downloads my app, and I've seen generally that guy stays with me for at least 2 years, right? And in the lifetime of 2 years, I make say $20 from every customer. So that $20 per customer becomes my LTV of a customer. How do we use it? We'll come to that later. MVP. Now, this is a very interesting term. Minimum viable product. If you remember my first slide, I've spoken about prototype, beta version. I think there's one more term. Yeah, okay, PMF. Beta version, or it could be like, okay, I'm not able to recall that. So MVP, these are all synonyms, right? Now, different kind of technology, people use different terms, but MVP is nothing like minimum viable product. So it's a like of a beta version or a prototype which is ready to go into the market and test it initially with the customer. Now, when we start using these kind of terms, LTV, CAC, MVP, PM, now PMF is product market fit. When my MVP is ready, I go to the market, test with 100 customers, test with 500 customers, take feedback, and then again make changes in my product. When the product is finally ready to be launched in the larger market, out of my experiment, whatever samples that I've chosen, that becomes my product market fit. So when you talk to the investor in their language, hey, my MVP is ready. I have tested it with 100 people and my PMF would be ready by next 3 months. That they would start loving you. They will start, yeah, this guy understands what a startup investing in, what is startup all about. So this is something that we need to learn and unlearn. We need to unlearn our terms, terminologies, and start learning their jargons as well, right? Traction. Now, this is one of the most common term that is used in startup world. Now, what is traction? It's nothing, to be very frank. Simple. If my sales is growing, my revenue is growing, I'll say I'm seeing traction. So basically, it's an indication of growth, whether I am seeing some improvement in my business. So traction could be, are my users growing? I'm Facebook. I don't charge anything from my customers, right? So they are not even my customers. I'll come to that. So those are my users. So is my users growing? Yes. There's a company called ShareChat. I don't know how many of you have heard. It's similar to Facebook. Similar, I would say, not exactly, but it's in a Indian local language. Last, when I checked their website, they were into, I think, 16 languages, if I'm not, Indian local languages in different parts of the country. Now, they have a zero revenue today, but of course, they're building a product in which they're attracting users. So what the investors look for are these guys are having traction in terms of users who are using their platform, so that tomorrow it is monetizable, where they can actually monetize and make money out of it. Unit economics, in which we can play a big role. We'll discuss a separate complete slide on unit economics. So I'll keep that on reserve for now. Valuation. So I think this is the most loved word by all of us here when it comes to money, funding, valuation. To start with, I'll give you one example. Suppose I have started a company. It's a 1-year-old company, and I want to raise 1 crore rupees, 1 CR from the investors. Now it could be any investor, right? Now when I raise that money, there's a percentage, right? So at what valuation do I raise? Suppose my pre-money valuation that I've defined, I'll tell you how do we define that. We'll come to that. Suppose it's 9 crores. I say my pre-money valuation 9 crores and I want to raise 1 crore. So if my pre-money is 9 crores, my post-money valuation becomes 10 crores. So basically simple math, 9 plus 1 equal to 10. And how much stake do I give to my investors? I have given 10% stake to my investors. How? I have raised 1 crore and my post-money valuation of the company is 10 crores. So 1 by 10 is 10%. So against that 1 crore, I have diluted my 10% ownership of the company to that particular investor. So that's my pre-money and post-money. And this is very, very important to understand the math behind this. What is pre-money? What is post-money? Otherwise, we'll make a big mistake while computing the valuation, computing the per share value, etc., etc. So that's very important to understand these definitions. Term sheet, I think all of you must be knowing. Just before investment, investors issue a term sheet which has the majority of the terms on the valuation that they were going to put money in the company, right? Finally, when it comes to funding, there are different bodies who fund, right? They are called angel, PE, VC. So we'll discuss in detail in the next slide. Any questions till now? Happy to answer. Okay. Assuming there are no questions. Now there are different funding stages, right? Which is again equally important. So we very commonly hear, read in the newspaper, different portals, Your Story, Inc42, etc. Is that so and so company has raised their Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D. Now who defines these terms? To be very frank, no one. It's the founder who defines this. It's the investor who defines it. It's us who defines it. The right kind of advisors who defines it. So what are the stages? First, let's understand that. The first and foremost, when I start a new capital in a company, there's something called seed capital. Okay, one term which I missed out is called bootstrapped. Now, what is bootstrapped? When I start my company with my own money, it's called bootstrapped. When I take external money, then it's not bootstrapped, right? When I take external money, then these funding stages come into picture. So all these while, since decades and decades, since our independence, the business that we have done, it was always bootstrapped. Taking a bank loan is bootstrapped. That's not we are not diluted our ownership in the company. Taking funding from an external agency and external fund, that is something called funding. So bootstrap is a term that you would hear very commonly in the startup ecosystem, right? Now, when you start a company initially, when you want to raise a small money, obviously there would be very limited people who would want to. Again, you need a very small money to start with, right? Initially, you will put some of your own money. You will borrow money from, not borrow, I would say, give shares to them as friends and family. FNF is friends and family. There could be some angels. Angels meaning what? Angels are someone like HNIs, high net worth individual, or it could be ultra HNIs who, as an asset class, want to invest in startups. They know that they understand the risk of investing in a startup. They know that my investment could go to 5x or 10x in 2 years time, or it could be zero, right? But it's a new asset class. So obviously, as an investor, when we invest, we could invest in mutual funds, equity market, it could be debt market, it could be gold, it could be real estate. But this is a new class of investment, which you might have heard that so many people are willing to invest, and they put ticket size of 5 lakhs to 50 lakhs, and even 1 crore. So few of the people that they write checks, right? In our company at Nimble Growth, we have raised some angel money in the past, in last 3 years. It's a 4-year-old company, and today, as we speak, we are doing another angel round right now, as we speak. So once you have raised this seed capital angel money, then your business goes well, then you go to a VC or a PE. Now there are two terms called VC and a PE. Theoretically, the difference between VC and a PE is VC is a early stage investor where they take a small stake, put a small check. Small check could range from 1 million to 20 million, depending on the size of the VC. Then the next step is you go to PE. When you go to a PE, they want a larger stake in the company, maybe 40% to 50% or 60%. They would want to acquire the control of the company, and they will write really large checks, which may range from say 20 million to 500 million as well, or maybe even $1 billion, right? So that now practically when we talk in our circles in the startup ecosystem, we don't even care how to define VC or PE. It's a guy with a larger check, as simple. So we call it VCP, simple, or we just call it VC. Does not matter. Or we call it P, simple. And now, what are these series? Now, depending on my wish, the stage that my company is in, we name it, right? So, like for example, someone may call it, hey, I am raising $1 million right now, and says my Series A. My next round at a valuation of say 50 million, I want to raise say 10 million, I may call it Series B. Some don't even want to call it this thing that, oh, if I call this Series B at such a low valuation, this may sound like, oh, I'm a very small company. So let's give a new term. So I've seen companies naming it as Series A1, A2, A3, A4 as well. Correct. Similarly, B1, B2, B3 as well. Some say it's my pre-Series A. Now, what is pre-Series A? There's nothing there. So these are just terms between you and me, between the investors and us, and for the media to talk about. That's it. There's no legal term to it. You can name it anything you want. I can start with Series Z also. Series Z can be a series, but again, does not make a difference. Finally, once you have reached a certain stage where you, like, for example, Zomato is eyeing an IPO right now, right? I don't know how the markets will behave, though I don't think that it's a good investment from my personal perspective again. But now Zomato will do an IPO, right? There are so many VCs and Ps who have invested in it. They may want to take an exit. Like, for example, InfoEdge is one of the investors, that is Naukri, owner of Naukri.com, right? So InfoEdge would take part exit in their investment. And I was just studying the red herring prospectus of Zomato. What I could understand that whatever money they had put, they are trying to get back their cost of investment completely through this IPO. But they still would be ending up the same stake that I think it was somewhere around 17 or 18%. They would still stay at the same stake in Zomato, even after this liquidation. So they're playing a very smart, they're doing a smart job where they know it's a bull market, irrespective of the economic fundamentals out there. People are going to subscribe because it's a bull market. They know IPO listing. There's a lot of people want to take that benefit. They would liquidate their stake, at least get the cost back, and then they'll sell silently. Let the company perform, let them beat them, and again, probably in 3-4 years when they become profitable, then it will. So how I see a graph of Zomato, I would definitely apply for IPO, but would like to exit on the first day itself if I get an allotment, which I don't get generally. My bad luck is that. But the graph would be like this. First, it will go down deep initially. Then probably once after a few quarters or so, when it becomes profitable and so starts showing traction, then it may start rising. But when it goes down deep, I love the Zomato model. I would start again putting money from long-term perspective, pure fundamental investment, right? Okay. So once the terms are clear on now we have understood some jargons, we understood the funding stages. Next important is what are the steps involved in fundraising, right? Now this is where I think we as consultants at Chartered Account can play a big role out there in terms of funders. But to do that, obviously we need to understand a lot, right? So one, we can play a role of an investment banker. Now, if you see these first two legs, initial follow-up meeting, investment banker, these are synonymous. So now why I kept it separately, just to showcase that everything, whatever is written in this, can be played by someone called investment banker. Now we can become an IB. No one stops us, right? But where do we start? If we have done already such kind of deals, little bit of M&A deals, of course, that's a good start. If we are not, where do we start? We need to create a market for ourselves. How do we create that market? Obviously, talking to more and more startups, giving them, starting with those compliance services, probably helping them with startup relations, and then understanding how a fundraising process works, how does the valuation works, etc. Then slowly getting into, because obviously, see, when we are talking to 50 clients, there is a possibility we know people who are who have money who can invest. We know there are companies who need money, and there is a great idea. And if you actually showcase those ideas to someone, that's a very good start to become an investment banker to start with. And there's a huge scope, I'm telling you, in becoming an investment banker. Even if you don't start becoming an investment banker per se, where you can close around, at least you can start with creating something called data book, creating financial projections, creating an IM, information memorandum. Now, these are jargons. I'll tell you what this means. Data book is nothing. It's a historical MIS, right? Again, it's a term. You can call it a MIS, you can call it a data book, you can call it a past data or whatever, right? So the way you present the data to an investor or to someone, it's very critical. So it's important to understand how an MIS is prepared, how the historical data needs to be presented, what are the key metrics that you need. But to even before understanding what are the key metrics that someone would be interested, that someone could be attracted to it, you need to first understand the business model. First and the foremost point is the business model. Once you have understood the business model very clearly, what is the market size, right? Which area they're operating into, what is the plan of growth. I'll give you one example. All those who have dealt with the bankers for raising funds in terms of debt, we might have come across multiple terms, etc. Like for example, we create projections, right? But generally what I have seen, especially in a smaller round of funding, we simply copy paste your last year P&L, add say 10% to the revenue, add 8% to the cost, and so that see there's a 2% or 5%, 10% increase year on year, and it will become profitable. You can just fund the working capital, cash credit or whatever, OD, right? But that does not work here. When we create a financial projections in a startup fundraise, it has to be as detailed as possible. I'll give you one example. Suppose I am Facebook. I am saying that I will have 1 million users acquired every month. That 1 million, I am going to make a money of say 50 cents from every customer, right? So 1 million into 50 cents, that is giving me 500,000 revenue, right? Suppose these are hypothetical numbers. Now, first of all, you will have to define or source your valuation, source your assumptions that you use of assuming that how will you get to that 1 million. Now, obviously, for getting that 1 million, you need to create a multiple leads. That's called a sales funnel, right? So you have to reach out to multiple people. Some may convert, some may not convert, but your lead cost is different. So you have to first maybe start with say, I target 2 million people, but only 1 million people, 50% of them download my app or register as an account holder in my app, right? For doing that, how would you reach those 2 million people? It could be through ads, it could be social media ads, it could be Instagram apps or maybe whatever ads, it could be referrals, it could be cashbacks, because if I refer to my friend, I get some cashback. Now that has a cost. So you have to ensure first you define the numbers, ensure what is the cost involved. That is, you remember we have spoken about CAC CAC, customer acquisition cost. You have to clearly define my leads to conversion. So maybe leads to a warm lead to hot lead to conversion. Now this whole funnel has to be put in your model. Once that has been done, then you need to define the assumption. How did you assume that you will make 50 cents from each customer? What is the historical number that you speak about? Or do you have enough data from your competitors or someone to prove that assumption is correct? Once you have done that, you have the number of consumers, you have number of the revenue per consumer, and then you multiply and get to the revenue. So just for one line item of revenue, you need to go too deep into that and explain your assumptions for each and every line item that you're talking about, right? Now this whole flow of numbers would come from data book flowing to your financial projections. Now the data book is history. From there I start and move to my futuristic projections. That is the financial projection. Now financial data book may contain multiple other things like business metrics, right? Like business metrics could be, what is the traffic in my website? Can I show that, see, today I am getting 9 million of traffic in my website coming in organically, out of which, not organically overall, out of which 50% is organic. Automatically people come and go enter my website because it's such a good website. Second could be through my SEO, that is search engine optimization, 20% come. Then through SEM, like search engine marketing, like all these Facebook ads, etc. My 30% people come. So that breakup, and then you saw it's growing 10% month on month. So every month I am getting unique new visitors in terms of 9 to 10 million. That's a huge number. 90 lakhs to 1 crore people are coming to my website. Then you can show, see, this is the potential of my business. Tomorrow, if I start offering some business or services to them, I can actually, one second. Yeah. So I can actually showcase very clearly to them, see, this is the way my traffic is growing. Tomorrow, as soon as I showcase some services to, one second, I'll just put on my charger. Yeah. So as soon as I do that, I can showcase that this is the potential that my business has. Tomorrow, when I offer my product or service to these customers, they could be a high conversion. Now, again, the question would be, how do you assume that conversion percentage? Do you assume that 2% conversion as a customer? Because these are all users. User conversion is easy, it's free, right? Or it could be at a cost, some CAC. But when I say really to become a customer, I will have a 2% conversion. Who would be really paying customers? Like, for example, today you can run a Facebook ad. I think 100% of us are using Facebook, but how many of us actually run ads into it by paying to Facebook? I think very, very few of us. Of course, talking about our ICAI ethical guidelines, we are not allowed to do so. But having said that, even in our client base, if you see how many of them use, very few. So probably let me just take a random guess. It could be say 2% or 3%. Now that conversion, of course, but for that you need to reach out to so many people. So what I'm trying to say, in all, every line item of your P&L, every line item of your balance sheet should be justified by proper assumptions, detailed assumptions, and detailed projections. Do you think this is possible for any founder to do it himself without having a background knowledge of understanding the P&L, balance sheet, the numbers, using Excel? I think we are masters of Excel, right? That is a great big play out there in terms of preparing data book, financial, irrespective whether you are able to help them raise money or not. This is the first step. This preparation can start even 1 year before raising money. So you can go there, tell them, boss, this is something that we would want to help you with. Second would be how much money do they raise? That will come out as an outcome of this financial projection if this has been done properly. How much the money do they need? Now, what is the investor looking for? They are looking for, first question would be how much money do you need? I'll say I need $2 million. And the next would be, what are you going to use that for? I would say I'll use $500,000 to improve my tech, $500,000 to improve my team strength, $500,000 for marketing, $500,000 for my other stuff, whatever, right? For some growth or expansion, blah, blah, blah. But that plan has to be ready. Who will justify that plan? This financial projection will justify. So the end use of funds is very, very important. You have to be very clear. Third important question that you need to answer. Okay, I'll write a check of $2 million. What is your current status? Suppose I say that my current top line is $1 million. With this $2 million raise, I am going to take my top line from $1 million to say $5 million or $10 million. Where is the plan for that? Again, financial projections will justify that. So you have to sell the dream, the value to your investors that, okay, if you help me raise this money, if you get me this money, I am going to take this company from this to this in so much time. Your financial projections will. Again, one point of disclaimer here. When you create a financial projection, I'm telling you, we are not gods, right? No one is God. No one can actually predict the future. And don't expect, and don't think that investors are expecting that. But what is doable is that at least 1 year plan can be a watertight plan, which is definitely in our control, right? In the founder's control. They need to think on that. How do they plan that? But if you say you create a 5-year plan, of course I can create 50 years plan. But can you justify every line item? Not possible. So what I would rather do, again, depending on the business idea, which business I'm talking to, generally, again, it's not a thumb rule, but yeah, generally you can create a watertight plan for 1 year, and post that it could be extrapolation. Then no one would care, yeah, how much you have taken the growth for the future. They are more interested in the immediate 1 year or 2 year plan at the most, which should be very detailed. Post that, don't even care. If you're creating a monthly plan or quarterly plan, your first 12 months or first 4 quarters or 6 quarters should be more watertight, but not beyond that. Right? Once you have done this, there's something called IM, Information Memorandum. We also call it business deck. Again, these are synonyms, which has to be a particular format has to be followed. Again, it's not a rule of the law that you have to follow exact format, but there's a flow that is important. Like you first define the problem. Then you define your solution. Then you define the market size in which you're operating. Then you define the potential of the market. Then you say, how will your solution, what's your strategy? Then you talk about the team strength, and what is, if there's a competitor, what's the competitor analysis? And then finally, what is your ask? Or your ask can be just kept as outside of your deck, right? So this flow has to be followed properly when you're creating a business deck and memorandum. No, now we may not be great designer. That's okay. You can hire a designer, or the team may have a designer already. Your client may have a designer, right? But you can think on those lines how that story needs to be. So that story building is very, very important. That generally finance professionals can do play a big role. Today, let me tell you, most of the IB's role is played by MBAs. Very few chartered accountants are in this area. Why? Because probably we are not thought of entering this area. But I have played a lot of roles in being a banker. I have raised funds for the company where I work for, and somebody helped companies raise money in multiple areas. So irrespective whether they raise money or not, I know exactly how to sell my product or my service of financial when I used to do that, and make sure that they come to me as a client and they pay me handsomely. That is very important, right? Once these are all done and you have an agreement with the investor, they would issue a term sheet, which we all are aware of, which would have your major terms, and then the DD would happen. Now, DD may happen, may not happen. It again depends on the smartness of the founder as well as the advisor, like us, right? Now, if the DD happens, we can play a big role in DD as well. So there are two things. One, if you are a banker, obviously you can't be a DD player. You cannot do the DD yourself, but there could be someone else you can bring in your known people to get the DD done. Or if you are a third party where you know the investors per se independently, you can do a DD for a lot of companies. Now, DD is not equivalent to audit. Audit is for reporting purpose, DD is purely from business purpose. So in DD, I am not going to tell you that you have to go and do the vouching. No, not at all. That's not the expectation. You will start with an assumption that whatever numbers are being presented to you is correct. You start with that assumption, put that as a disclaimer. But the major purpose of DD is that if a company is saying that I have been growing 5% month on month since last 12 months, is that true? You have to take the data, find out the anomalies. Is it that they have just tried to put the data in such a way, reality is something else in the accounts, but they've shown the user growth. It could be a sudden jump in 1 month of 60% because of some activity, and they might have just spread it across the year and shown that 5% month on month growth was there. So those kind of anomalies in the data presented earlier, and as a DD team, you need to find it out. So finance and legal DD or commercial DD is something that we can actually play a big role into, and which I think a lot of CA firms are already doing. Big Fours have taken a major chunk. I think this is the right time for us to actually get into that and take that kind of way. Start with small companies, small DD, small by value, but slowly we can grow. Finally, on the funding part, there are multiple agreements, multiple negotiations that we need to do, which I'll take you to the next slide. Now, due to paucity of time, I'll try to hurry up a bit. So there are two major agreements that are signed, right, in which we can play a big role. One is called SSA. It's called Share Subscription Agreement, okay, or Security Subscription Agreement. Otherwise called Shareholders Agreement, SHA, Shareholders Agreement. SSA is being signed by every time a new investor comes in. SHA is signed by all the existing investors and the company, that these are the terms along with which we are entering into this agreement. That is a shareholders agreement. Now in this, the role that we can play is that while negotiating with for all these terms, they need some finance or a legal professional. Now, generally, legal professionals help in this, but I think as a finance professional, there's a big role that we need to play in this. Like, for example, there is a right called tag along right. Now, if there's a large investor out there, right, who is holding 60% of our company, we as promoter and some small shareholders, we are holding 40% of the company. Tomorrow, if a larger shareholder, that is 60% holder, wants to sell his stake, he may find a buyer and he says, okay, I'll sell my stake at a super high premium, and you deal with those small shareholders. I don't even care about them. It's very easy to just transfer that control. That time, if in the SHA I have a tag along right, which says if the largest shareholder is trying to sell the shares of his company, I have a right to tag along with them as a promoter. That way, I safeguard my interest. So, who is going to advise the promoter, especially the early who have not actually dealt with these kind of deals, right? In the startup world, is a first round of investment that they're raising. That time, because VCs are very cunning and very smart, so you need someone on your side or on the founder side to actually negotiate these terms well. But how will you negotiate unless we don't understand the meaning of these terms? So all these terms need to be understood properly, and then we can actually play a very big role. How many board seats are we going to give? Who is going to define that? There's no thumb rule for that. I would say anyone holding more than 10% equity will get a board seat. Otherwise, not. There are companies I've seen they give board seat even at 5% because they don't have an option to do so, right? Yeah. Now this is something very interesting, and I think we would be able to relate to it. So what I've tried to do here, I just try to represent a simple P&L in a different form. What we call it unit economics. Now this is something investors love, founders love, and if you talk in unit economic terms, I think they would start loving you. They would understand that you understand their language, right? So let me take you through, and I would want a bit of participation from the participants here. Suppose now the numbers up to here, right? CM percentage, this you see, is on a per unit basis. So my unit could be say one product that I sell. Okay. If I make a revenue of 100 rupees and my variable cost for that product or service is 50, my contribution margin 1 is 50. That is, I make a CM percentage 1 of 50%. Then I say my customer acquisition cost is 60. That is, for onboarding one customer, I'm spending 60 rupees. So my net contribution margin is 10 rupees negative. That is minus 10% on my revenue, right? Then there is some absolute value of fixed cost. Then of course I can't compute EBITDA because I do not know the absolute value of these. Now, as a finance professional or as a businessman, would like to understand from you, what do you think about this business model? Is it a good business model? Is it a nice P&L to invest in? Would you invest in this company? If you could just write in the chat box. I'm not able to see the chat box. Any idea? Any thoughts? Depends on the growth potential. Rohit says depends on the growth potential. Okay. No. So okay. When you talk about growth, right? Okay. Anyone else would want to comment? I would answer that. Okay. My second question then to Lohit specifically. Growth potential. How do you define that, right? Say for example, I am asking you. I know my fixed cost is 80 lakhs, right? What is the number of units that should I sell to break even in this kind of business? No answers? I guess we have more of silent spectators today. CAC is customer acquisition cost. So Lohit says 80,000 units if I sell, I'm going to make that money. So, but Lohit, the problem here is that, okay, long-term perspective. So the problem is that if I sell 80,000 units, right? Let me do the math for you. When I sell 80,000 units, so Shyam Prarala says it's not a good business. CAC is too high. Okay. So when I'm selling 80,000 units, right, in this business, I make 80,000 into 100 as revenue. I spend 80,000 into 50 as cost. I'm left with 50, and I spend 80,000 into 60 because 80,000 units I'm selling, and ultimately I lose 10 rupees. So that means I am losing 80,000 into 10. That is 8 lakh rupees in this when I sell 8. So I can never break even in this kind of business. So even if I sell, that is the reason why I wanted to tell you that unit economics is so important. When you are doing your math on a per unit basis, you have to ensure your contribution margin per unit basis has to be positive. Only then it makes a business viable, irrespective of the number of units that you sell. This is why investors love it. If you can prove on a unit economic basis, I am profitable, then your scale comes into picture. Only then if you scale and your fixed cost remains fixed cost, right? It's a fixed in nature. Then when you scale, you start making more and more profits, correct? Now, the interesting part, right? I would like to just add one small note here. When I spoke about customer acquisition cost, which is 60 rupees per customer that I onboard, just imagine if the same customer comes and buys another product from me. Right now, my assumption was that one customer is buying one product, right? If the same customer comes back to my platform without any additional CAC and he buys another product, what I would make from him, I was making 50 rupees earlier from one customer for 1 unit. The same customer is actually buying 2 units and I make 100 rupees from them. But my CAC remains same. It remains 60. So I start making 40 rupees extra from that same customer. This is exactly what I was telling you about LTV of a customer. So in my example, the LTV of the customer becomes twice, that is 2 times. So in terms of revenue, my LTV per customer is 200 rupees. My LTV per customer based on contribution margin is 100 rupees. Then suddenly this business which looks so bad, it becomes very attractive. What I am trying to say that my customer acquisition cost is a one-time cost for acquiring that customer. My LTV per customer is that my customer, when they come to my platform, they buy at least 2 times. So say for example, I take example of Netflix. Netflix is spending some amount in digital marketing, etc., trying to and doing a lot of ads, advertisements, right? When we onboard, suppose they are spending 60 rupees, but for the first month subscription that I take, whatever money that they charge, 500,000 rupees, that is this 100. If I renew that on the second month itself, then automatically for them it's a dual revenue. So if I study the data of Netflix, right, and I say that on an average, I've seen a customer stays in Netflix platform for 2 months in a year, and then I'll have to respend on an average. Now, some may stay for a whole year, some may spend only for 1 month, etc., right? Average is 2. So when my LTV becomes 2, I make 100 rupees from one customer on an average, and I spend only 60. So it's a 40 rupees, 40% of contribution margin for me on a per unit basis for each customer that I do. Suddenly, this becomes a super profitable business. So Again, the idea was to not confuse you. Idea was to showcase you that the simple P&L that we draw from a reporting perspective, this is something, this is a new way of looking at the same P&L, which the investors like, right? And they would want to talk to you or discuss with you in these terms, understanding what is the contribution margin actually that you're making from the customer, because that can prove tomorrow when you scale, what is the per unit margin that you're going to. Second important perspective I would like to give in this is on the ratio terms. My revenue by CM1 is 2, that is 100 by 50. My revenue by CAC ratio, that is 100 by 60, is 1.7. Suppose if I am a CFO of a company, okay, or I'm a consultant or an advisor of a company, if I have to give a target to a sales guy, now who is a sales head, right? Or who is a sales head or maybe a chief marketing officer? He is the one generally in a company who would decide what will be my rate per unit, right? Selling price per unit. He would be the one who has to decide what would be my CAC. Now it's an interplay between these two. If I have to simply tell him, boss, this is your target. I just give him the target. Whatever rate you sell at, whatever cost you incur, your revenue by CAC ratio should be equivalent to this, 2 or more, for me to break even. Right now, seeing my P&L, it seems 100 by 60 is 1.7. This is my ratio. The target that I would want to give him, without disclosing all these real numbers of my real P&L, I can tell him, if you reach this ratio to 2, you're break even. As simple. Which means, for the same revenue of 100, you have to reduce your CAC to 50 to make this 2. As soon as you make this 50, you know my contribution margin of 50, my cost becomes 50, I am break even. Then maybe you could start with a target of more than 2, maybe 2.5 or 3 ratio. This is a different way of looking at the same P&L when you're talking to different genres of people, or maybe could have different stakeholders. So that was a different perspective that I wanted to give you. Okay. I think we have couple of I have just a couple of slides more, which I'll quickly try to cover in next 5 to 10 minutes, and then probably we'll move to a Q&A session. Okay. Now this is important to understand, since we are dealing with a lot of corporates. Very important to understand how does a finance sub or operate or work in a larger organization, right? Or in a larger organization at the top level, right? I think most of us know, but my area of understanding this is because when you go to talk to a CEO or a promoter or a founder, right, you need to, because they have no idea about finance, you have to tell them how to structure a finance team. What is the best, what are the areas that needs to be looked into? It cannot be random, one guy is looking after everything. You can help them hire the right guys because we understand which person is good for it. But simultaneously, we can help them in a lot of areas which we can provide as a virtual CFO services, or it could be finance advisory services. One area is, in any company, there could be a finance head or a CFO. Under that guy or a lady, there could be 4 different verticals. I'm talking about a good enough large company, or at least that vision should be there when the company goes, this is where we want to achieve. So we start structuring from the very basics. So today, as CS, we mostly focus, I think 80 to 85%, I could say even 90% of chartered accountants are focused in this area only, controllers. That is accounting, income tax, GST, law, compliance, FEMA law, blah, 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 right? These are the major focus areas, which we are champions of. Very good. But we need to start focusing on these other areas like BISFIN and FP&A, which is loved by founders, which is loved by investors. We can help them structure their annual operating plan, create an annual operating plan. We can help them create their budgets, ensure that whatever plan has been prepared, that has to be matched month on month. Work out the variances, which they don't have a capable team to do that. Do we start creating MIS reports for them for different verticals, different business functions? Understand their business functioning different, so even a marketing P&L can be made separately, which we never focus. We always focus on creating a P&L for your financial reporting, which is once a year. Why can't we create MISs for every month or maybe every quarter? We can become a conduit or become a finance advisor who would be sitting in their business meetings every week or maybe every month, whenever they, so depending on the business model that they're working. We can become an advisor. We can tell them, this is your budget, you have to operate in this budget. This is where you are going wrong from the business perspective. Because we have knowledge of the law, we have knowledge of numbers, we are good with numbers, we know how controllers work. Simultaneously, if we get into the business part of it, we can actually become a really good advisor. They would start appreciating the value that we add, and they will not hesitate to pay us then. This is a new area of practice that we should get into. Today, I see a lot of CAs in practice say that we are providing virtual CFO services. But unfortunately, when I speak with them, I understand that they are only providing this service. They will say that, yeah, you outsource your accounting piece, we'll do your accounting. We'll help you with filing and all. That is good. I'm not against it. But my point is, this is area that we need to focus and delve deeper, which is the real money making area, which unfortunately either the big fours have taken up or the MBAs out there have taken up that area. But we can play a huge role. Even in legal, I think we have lawyers in our practice. Even we are kind of a semi-lawyer, you can call it. We read so much of contracts, etc. We can help them with contract management agreements. This is one area which I was talking about as an IB or as an advisor to the company. We can help them structure a particular fundraise. First, helping them understand should they raise funds or not. Does not mean that every time you raise fund, only that is the validation of your good business model. If they are raising fund, do they need to dilute and raise a good amount of money in terms of equity only? Why can't it be a combination of debt and equity? Now, debt could be collateralized. It could be without collateral as well. There are ways and means of doing it. It could be a structured debt. Then you can help them understand whether equity to be issued, whether CCPS to be issued, whether convertible to be issued. All these areas can be actually helped. But only that can be done once we deep dive into their business understanding from their ownership point of view, from their like an internal guide for them. I hope I'm making sense and this adds value to all of you. Now, these are the other areas that we spoke about. I'll just quickly summarize. This one area that I did not spoke is in the ESOP structuring, right? Now, ESOP structuring is something that startups want to hire good talents. They don't have money. They have very limited funds. So they try to offer ESOP to the employees. Now, but they do not really have any idea and they end up giving a lot of shares or sometimes lesser to deserving candidates, right? We can help them structure the ESOP. Like, for example, if I hire a guy whose salary is 20 lakhs per annum, what is the worth of ESOP should I give? How do I value those? I'm not talking about that valuation for, again, filing purpose. That it's manageable. We can manage any kind of valuation, whether it's MC, whether it's income, whether it's FEMA. I'm talking about what is the value that I need to show where it's not a listed company, it's not a liquid stock. That I can show to the employee, sell that idea and ensure that, okay, if this guy is coming at 20 lakhs, can I show him that I'm giving you 20 lakh worth of shares as well? So your package is actually 40 lakhs. That structuring is something that you can help them with, even including your legal terms like creating ESOP policy, getting it passed in a board meeting or a shareholder meeting, etc. Treasury management, as I mentioned, if you have idle money, where to invest? It could be debt mutual funds, it could be FDs, it could be corporate FDs, etc. So I have handled funds for more than 1,500 crores in different startups. I do even today in some cases. So treasury management is a big area that you can actually help them structure it. Startup India, we have discussed in detail. Board management, you can become part of their board investors meet. Till the time they don't hire a full-time CFO, till the time they're so small, I would say till the time they don't raise their Series A or Series B, unless one of the founder is a finance professional already. You can become the part of their board meeting, either as an independent director or maybe just as a virtual CFO for them. Rest, I think, exits and tax planning. Where should the investment lie? Where should the IP of the company lie? How do they create a corporate structure? Corporate structuring can be played really well by us. Exits can be planned. The tax planning, which we are champions of. When to hold the shares, when to execute, when to exit. How do you hold a share? Do you hold in your name or others' name, etc., etc.? That can be planned, right? With this, finally, since I take a lot of sessions in multiple tech colleges, I started scribbling some notes of some 10 odd pages. I thought I'll write something so that I can just share with some people who don't have much idea of finance or maybe early stage founders. But I ended up writing a book because I could not write whatever I wanted to share. So, and I'm lucky to have a foreword by Sir Nilesh Vikamse. He's a past president of ICA, who will be there for tomorrow's program as well in the institute. So I think this is a very lean book. I would suggest all those who are interested into understanding more about finance, if you want to actually switch gears from your traditional practice to this area, or if you want to start your own startup, understanding startup finance in a very simple language, I think this book will be very helpful. If you get a chance to read, it's available in all the platforms out there, soft copy as well as hard copy. And do share your feedback if you happen to read it. With this, I would like to close. Thank you very much. My email ID, mobile number is given there. Any help that you require from my end, more than happy to help as a whatever limited experience that I have in this field. Simultaneously, as a fraternity, I would like to just help our fraternity members to grow in whatever area we can. Thank you very much. So happy to take questions if any. So moderator, if you wish, you can just take questions and we can discuss.
So we don't have any questions asked by members in the chat box or Q&A. Members, if you have any question, kindly put it in the Q&A box.
So Mr. Gopal Krishna is asking any list of angel investor or venture capitalists who can be approached to India for funding. I think Mr. Gopal, there's a long list. If you just Google about who are the venture capital, to name a few, like for example, we were very active in Bangalore as well, in across India, like Axel, Sequoia. These are the VCs who invest in your early stage startups. These are some of the names. There's a long list. In fact, you just Google, you can. In fact, if you want, I can share you that list as well. Again, I'll link from the Google. In terms of angel list, I think it comes from your own network. You have to get your network who are HNIs, who understands the startup investing as a class. But there are a lot of bodies who actually work, whoever there's a network of angels. To name a few, there's something called Angel List. There's something called Mumbai Angels, something called Indian Angels. There's a group called Venture Catalyst. There's a group called I'm forgetting the name. Indian Angel Network. There's a group called IPV, that is again, one of the chartered accountant is a founder of that IPV. I think Inflection Point Ventures. So there are multiple angel list of multiple angel groups who try to invest with smaller checks into. But sometimes, like for example, for my company, when I'm raising this fund, I am raising this based on my network itself. If any one of you are interested in participating in that round, more than welcome. But I'm doing that myself. I've not gone to a particular. So it all depends on your network. There's another question from Madhuji, that almost every day about hundreds are registering and only about 20%, 2% survive. What is the opportunity of virtual CFO in a startup space? See, that's the beauty. What kind of service that we are providing is something that is sector agnostic one, right? So the question here from Madhuji is that there you said that out of 100 new startups, only 2% survive, rest are closed, right? When that does not really matter to us. To be very frank, even if they survive those 2%, it takes a long time to close down, because our founders are like a very hard nut to crack, right? So they don't just give up so easily. That is where they start with. Even if they stop, that relationship building will help you and understand, and it's helpful for you that you get that learning from one company and then you move to another. And when you have a bouquet of companies, when you're providing services to multiple companies, your network grows very well, and you can help them then get fundraise, help them with these ideas. Even if they have to close down, right, you have to ensure that your interest is taken care of. And maybe probably why are they closing down? Probably their business idea was not that great enough on the first place. So we could be the people who can actually help them assess whether ideas are good enough or not, whether it's scalable or not. How fundamentally fundable idea is it? Or should they at all raise the funds? I know some startup guys, founders, who say, I want to start a startup only to raise funds. If someone else is putting their money, I am doing it, otherwise not. I'm telling you, that kind of startups would never thrive. If you're not ready to put your own stake in that company, your commitment is not that great. Yes, some say that I'm not going to leave my job, but I'll do this in parallel. Of course, there could be financial factors where he or she is not able to. But simultaneously, are you completely invested in that idea? That shows the way. So tomorrow, if there is a guy who is into job and he comes to me that, are you ready to, my first, so I have my own filtering mechanism. I would say, if you are leaving your job and 100% if I like that idea personally, I would say, yeah, I'm there with you. Otherwise, I'm not there with you. So that's just one of an example. Right. Second, is startup funding happens only in IT sector? Is it possible in manufacturing? Of course it is. So I'll give you an example. Like there's a company called Ather Energy, right? Ather Energy is a startup. It has got well funded. I think Hero Group has invested in them, and of course it was a strategic investment. They make EVs, basically two-wheelers, which is electric vehicles, two-wheeler electric vehicles. So it's not limited to IT, but why? So the right question to put it here. This question is from Mr. Gunasekar. Right question to ask would be, why is it that mostly tech ideas are well funded? Because the answer lies in my first slide. A tech idea is highly scalable. You can grow month on month. If you open a shop, right? Of course, you can do a good business, right? I can reach 20 crore top line. I can reach 40 crore top line. But can you make that 20 crore to 200 crore in 1 year's time? Answer would be no, because you are catering to a limited area. If you are doing a manufacturing of a unique product, which is not available. So I can tell you there's a lot of D2C model. D2C is direct to consumer models, where where a lot of companies have started working on multiple consumer products, like for example, a health drink, or it could be a small cake or whatever. They are creating a nice brand. Like there's a company called Mamaearth. I think ladies out there must have been using it. So that Mamaearth is a brand which is just, I think, 1 or 2 years old, not much old. But they have created a brand in such a way. It's a manufacturing company. And what I know that they don't even have their own manufacturing. Now they might have set up, but they start with your outsourced manufacturing. It's like a job work with their own labeling, brand white labeling, and then they sell that product. But that once they catches the market, of course, there are investors who are willing to fund. But initially, you have to do that on your own. You have to invest your initial money, create that brand, ensure there is enough customer, enough takers, and then you approach an investor. That would be the right part. I'm talking about a VC investor. But of course, angel and friends and family, you can raise obviously from the table. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah, Divya, I think there are no more questions, so we can close.
So, members, I take this opportunity on behalf of Bangalore branch to propose formal vote of thanks for today's study circle meet. Wholehearted thanks to our speaker. Thank you so much, sir, for giving an excellent presentation. On behalf of entire managing committee members and also on behalf of entire participants, I thank C. Rahul Saria for giving an excellent presentation and such a knowledgeable one. Thank you so much. A lot of accolades to you. Thank you so much once again, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope I could add some value to all the participants.
Definitely,
look
sir,
forward to your
definitely.
feedback. Yeah.
Definitely,
Thank you so
sir,
much.
definitely. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Dear
you.
members, thank you all of you for your active participation. Request all of you to kindly participate in tomorrow's CA day. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.